This is Mike Tatarsky, host of the Vietnam Weekly podcast and author of the Vietnam Weekly newsletter, coming to you from Ho Chi Minh City. Apologies if I sound a bit congested, dealing with some sort of sickness that's going around. As many listeners are likely aware, several regions of Vietnam have withstood historically severe weather in recent weeks, from Thanh Nguyen to Hanoi, down to Hue and Hoi An, and even further south to Can Hoa and Dak Lak. A relentless barrage of typhoons and extreme rain has flooded communities from the coast up into the mountains, killing dozens and swamping hundreds of thousands of homes, while landslides have blocked numerous highways across the country. In just one data point of how astonishing this has been, Bac Ma, the mountain south of Hue, received the second most rainfall in 24 hours ever recorded anywhere on the planet in modern history. The scale of the damage is huge, spanning multiple provinces across more than half of Vietnam's considerable length. While rescue services and official agencies are doing their best, even the most well-funded organizations are strained. That's where grassroots groups can help, and that includes the ongoing fundraising campaign run by Wendy Pham and Chris Tran, two Vietnamese American educators and storytellers. They first worked together after Typhoon Yagi last year and resumed their effort during this current storm season, delivering emergency food and clean water, supplying medical aid, and more. Today's guest is Chris Tran, a longtime friend of mine and a content creator who lives here in Ho Chi Minh City as well. We discuss the storm relief efforts he's a part of, how emergency fundraising campaigns are perceived, the resilience of people here in Vietnam, his work with the Ba Lo Project, supporting Vietnamese deported by the Trump administration, the importance of preserving the Vietnamese language, and more. As always, if you have any comments, feedback, or guest ideas, get in touch at matatarsky@gmail.com. Let's get to my conversation with Chris. Chris, thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Really happy to be here, Mike.
Yeah, and just so listeners know, Chris and I go way back. We've known each other for a while, from cycling from Hanoi to Ho Chi Minh City. What was that, 10 years ago at this point or something like that?
Yeah. You were my one cycle buddy throughout the whole thing. It was just me and you.
Yeah. Anyway, so I know you left for a few years and now you've been back for a while. So it's been good to have you back in town, working on kind of a range of different projects, a few of which we'll talk about today. But I've actually been meaning to have you on for a while, but I really thought I should when I saw you working recently on kind of flood relief with the team. So I'm sure a lot of listeners are aware, but the last month and a half has been pretty awful for much of Vietnam. It started in the north, like Hanoi and Thanh Nguyen, and some of those provinces had two like back-to-back typhoons that had record flooding. Then Hue, Hoi An, a bunch of central Vietnam had historic flooding, and there's more happening pretty much as we talk right now. So obviously you live here, you're aware of all that stuff. So how did you kind of get involved with some of the flood relief work?
It started last year with Typhoon Yagi, actually. So around the same time, September 2024. It was just watching it on the news and seeing how bad it was, and then knowing that I had a platform where we could get some donations and help. And I teamed up with a good friend of mine. Her name is Wendy. She's a Vietnamese children's book author based in Boston, and her family's all here in Vietnam. So then they run a hospital in Hai Phong. So they have resources. Her mom has been doing similar work for a really long time. So then I can't remember who approached who first, but me and Wendy teamed up, and then she connected me to her family, and then we just started posting, and we got all of this like community support from people all over the world, and like all the followers on my social media, and then other content creators jumped in and also helped us spread the word. And then we got something around the range of like $60,000 raised for Typhoon Yagi last year. And I went out there to just kind of be the boots on the ground and just film and show people where the money's going, and interview people who were affected, and just really hoping that we didn't have to do it again this year. And I was watching the storm season come, and I'm like, okay, it's bad. This is kind of what Central goes through though every year, and then it became just like you said, like historical. So I'm just like, okay, this is really bad. And then I messaged Wendy, and it was a very, very short conversation. It's like, should we do something? Yes, let's do it. Let's start right now. And then we just went through the entire process again. And her mom actually retired So like in between Yagi and then this year, her mom was just like, just laying dormant. So it kind of felt like tapping like retired superheroes, because her mom is an incredible person. Like
Okay.
this, she is a machine when it comes to running these, mobilizing doctors, medication, like supplies, the logistics. She's a beast. And so we are like, uh, go, do you want to do this again? And she's like, if you guys get the funding, I'm there. I'm like, yes. And then within a couple of days, everything just picked up so fast. Like seriously, the conversation with me and Wendy, like day one was just like, I don't think we can even raise enough for one day of this, and then within one day we doubled our target. And then it just, um, Wendy's mom was just, if you want to do more, we can do more. And it's like, I think we can get more. And so let's do it. Let's help more people. And so it just kind of became what it is. And it's still happening.
Mm.
We're still heading out there in 2 weeks because the storm season's not over. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean that's great to hear. And are most of these donations coming like from overseas or in Vietnam or a mix of the two?
The vast majority are coming from overseas because we're using GoFundMe.
Oh yeah.
Just to give people peace of mind and like have all those reassurances that, GoFundMe kind of, backs people up and make sure that it's a legit project and everything. So they take a cut, but hey, to give people peace of mind, I think it's worth it. So then yeah, it's all going through GoFundMe, but we have a very, very good process of being transparent, even better than last year. And last year was already airtight, but this year, it transfers into a Vietnamese account, and then there's an app. Um, I think it's called the Nguyen Charity in Vietnamese, but it's basically like it looks like a bank account app that you would use here in Vietnam, but everything's public. So all the money that goes in there is just completely transparent. Like anybody can click on it and see like this is the money that we got, and then this is where it all went. Like it
Right.
just details every single thing. Yeah, so it's super duper transparent.
Nice.
You even see like the fees that we pay for GoFundMe, and then everything that goes into those accounts. And then we have pie charts as well. People can click on to show um, where the money is going in terms of like donations to medicine, to volunteer hotel stays, and like things like that. So we had a meeting a couple of days ago, and we managed to get um, the volunteer costs. So that's like feeding us and getting us around to just 5%. So 95% of that went straight to the families that were affected. So we're
Nice.
pretty proud of that.
Yeah, and I mean, kind of on the legitimacy front, I did see. I think it was an Instagram post from you guys where, or somebody mentioned how, there was some people who were doubting the campaign or criticizing it. I think that's comes with any any campaign, I suppose. But I know there is some like charity is not uh, super common in Vietnam. Maybe it's common. Maybe that's kind of the case in developing countries around the world, I suppose. But it's not quite like the U.S. where this kind of stuff is pretty common. So what kind of, have you heard much of that criticism or how do you deal with that?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think that I would say like 95% was positive, and then you had like 5% of people who were skeptical. And we talked about this in a lot of team meetings that we had, and it kind of was very hard for some people to deal with because we're trying to do so much good, and yet like why are people doubting us? But then I felt it's good. It's good to be skeptical, like I would be. I want to know where my money's going if I'm donating to something like this. And the interesting thing, though, was that we had kind of two extremes. And what I mean by that is, folks overseas who are like, oh, this money is going to go to the government, and then, the government being such a big organization or whatever, like, it's just not going to go to the right people. Like they just didn't trust that it might end up in the hands of the government. And then you had the other extreme that was saying you need to donate to only the government, not to individuals, not to these accounts. We have a government fund, and the government actually says beware of these personal accounts, which they should warn people about. And so you had the two extremes. So we had to speak to both of those fears because number one, it's very transparent, like I explained earlier. And number two, we work with the government. We have to.
Yeah,
You
right.
cannot just show up in a remote village with a giant bus of doctors and money and all kinds of things and then just do whatever you want. Like you have to tell people who you are, what you're doing there. They are the first people we contact is the local government and the Fatherland Front. So it's either local government or the Fatherland Front that they're the first ones to meet us once we get off the bus. And we had to this year especially submit so much paperwork to get clearance in order to show up because we're showing up with medical teams. So they're like, "Oh, you have doctors? Prove it. Show us their certification. Like, where are these doctors from? What are they specializing in? Oh, you're bringing medicine? Do you have, the proper paperwork to be able to prescribe these medications? What kind of medications?" Every single thing was double checked, triple checked. We'd finish our mobile clinics and then we'd sit in the bus for another hour because the government is checking off everything, like making sure that it's going to who it's supposed to go to. Right. So it is extremely transparent and there's a lot of steps involved that we
Yeah.
followed.
Hmm. Okay. And when it comes to getting out to the field, the floods in central Vietnam, especially, where these are vast areas, like hundreds of kilometers impacted across multiple provinces. How do you determine where to go?
The first is obviously, these are affected areas from the storms and typhoons. And number two is just really the clearance that we get. So last month when we were figuring out where to go, we contacted a lot of local places. And this is gonna sound weird, but everybody needs help. Like there's so many places you can help. It's like you can't really put a hierarchy so much on it because so many places had, like you said, historical flooding from Time Wing in like the north central all the way down to Hoi An, right? So you had like this huge stretch of Vietnam, and obviously we couldn't help everybody. Um, so it came down to the government offices that were the most responsive and were able to get us cleared so that we can come in. And some of them worked faster than others. So there were places that we wanted to go to, but we just couldn't get cleared to go fast enough. And so other places were like super willing to help out and really wanted us to be there. And then everything got cleared so quick that, we are just like, okay, we got to just go here just because, time and logistics.
Okay, yeah, that all makes sense. And I guess on a personal note, I mean, how have you felt, visiting these areas and seeing this? Like on my side, I think I've mentioned on the podcast before that like I'm from New Orleans. I lived through Hurricane Katrina. We evacuated, so I didn't have to be like rescued or anything, fortunately. But I've seen the aftermath and directly experienced the aftermath of like a massive natural disaster. And something I notice in Vietnam is I'm always kind of struck by how quickly people just like get going again. Or you see these photos of like people having lunch, or there was a one going around a couple months ago of like kids playing video games in a cyber cafe, like with a foot of water in there. And I don't know if that's safe or not, but it does seem like there's this spirit of just like, well, we're just gonna deal with it and carry on. I know that's not always possible if your house has been like completely destroyed, but what have you kind of seen firsthand or felt after going there?
Yeah, no, very much what you said. It's like a shocking amount of positivity and resilience, like us coming in and like having just this almost like deep sympathy, right? Because we're just like, oh my God, some of these people have lost their homes, or just seeing the destruction and like hearing people point out where the water level had gone up to. And I'm just like, oh my goodness, like you had to just get out of there. Like everything would have been gone. Like it's to the
Mhm.
roof, right? And just seeing people just laughing and having a good time while like they're dealing with the aftermath of all of it. But for us personally, it was a roller coaster ride. Last year for the trip to Yagi, I think that one was extra emotional because we did a lot more home visits and the local government pointed us out to families that needed extra help. And these are families that had lost family members in the landslides. So we sat down with the families and comforted them, and then they told us about what happened and the details, and it was just heart wrenching.
Mhm.
And they broke down and we broke down, and like it was just an absolute emotional roller coaster, because then we would leave that and then go to hand out gifts to like a school with kids, and the kids are just having a blast and running around and smiling and laughing, just
Mm.
being kids,
Yeah.
like they're just like, we're just having fun because they're people, they're humans. And then there's aunties and uncles around there that are just cracking jokes, and we're just like, this is the wildest just kind of shift and contrast, you know? But it's just people's resilience and then just getting through things, and yeah, it's remarkable. And even the teams we're with, the doctors, I'm sure they've seen so much. The volunteer doctors that we were with, and then they were also, sympathetic, but also like joking around with the locals. And then, at night they'd end up together drinking or singing karaoke or something like that, and it's just like, it feels like something that is just happening back in daily life in
Mm.
Saigon. It's just
Yeah.
wild, just the ups and downs, the ups and downs. But the big takeaway at the end of the day was just like, it's just the resilience, and people, just looking forward to cleaning up and just going back to everyday life.
Yeah, yeah, I can definitely get a sense of that. And I did have a question about whether or not that you think this would become a recurring campaign. I guess it already has. I don't think I was aware, or I forgot that you had done work after Yagi last year. But I mean, obviously, unfortunately, storms are a part of life here, and I know we can't attribute any single one to climate change, but that is certainly a contributing factor of more storms, stronger storms, what have you. So, I mean, do you think this will, like, next year's storm season, this will fire up again at some point?
Um, Man, as much as I don't want to say this, like, I'm a little bit pessimistic about the outlook. I feel like we're not in the clear, just like seeing how it got maybe even worse after last year with Yagi. And it seems like it might be a pattern. So I don't feel like the efforts that have been put in by folks across the board with support is going to be enough to lessen. I mean, we can't change the
No, I
weather
know.
next year. It's just like we can't just turn the storms off. But I really hope there's some massive collaborative effort to mitigate it
Mm,
somehow, and not. I hope no one's thinking that we're in the clear.
right, right.
If I'm thinking this, I know the experts are probably like, okay, we need to get ready for a lot more years of this. So something needs to happen. And I really hope it
Yeah,
does.
I have seen a couple articles about, I think, officials talking more about like learning to figuring out ways to live with floods instead of trying to fight them, which is, I mean, a lot of countries are trying to figure that out, so they're not alone. Yeah, but I'll be sure to include a link to the GoFundMe in the show notes, since I know that's ongoing. And switching gears a little bit, I know in your work on Instagram and all that, you kind of cover a lot of different topics. And I believe you've done a little bit recently on, or maybe more than a little bit, you tell me, regarding Vietnamese being deported from the U.S. back to here, which was an issue during, not to get too political, but during the first Trump presidency. I did an article about it. This was, I mean, it was sort of several years ago now. Obviously, is an issue again. I think the Vietnam side prefers to keep this a little bit quiet. You don't hear a ton about it in public, at least. But what can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So in my network of friends from back home, a couple people were already kind of working with deportees, and they linked me to an organization here that is doing work on the ground in the US mostly, but also here. So in the US, they're called Balo Project. That you can find them at baloproject.org. And in the US, they are basically like a resource for deportees and families, impacted families. So anyone who is dealing with what to do, if ICE shows up, somebody's been detained, things like that. Balo Project is a resource for that. And then they are a resource for the entire deportation process. Like they just help the families out and also the deportees with where you might be going, and maybe even appeals, like all kinds of things. I don't want to get details wrong because like I'm not a major part of that side of it. So I basically got tapped to just volunteer and just be a helping hand once the deportees arrive in the US. So that was maybe like 5 months ago that I started working with them. And Balo Project is called that because they give a backpack, which is Balo in Vietnamese, to the deportees. Because the biggest thing is if they don't have anyone here, then at least someone cares and shows up and gives them essentials. For example, a change of clothes is absolutely essential because people are showing up with whatever they got picked up by ICE with. That same clothes that you wear, whatever was in your pockets, that's what you show up with once you're here in Vietnam. So then just a fresh change of clothes is a really big thing. And a working phone to use with apps that they can use while in Vietnam that are pre-downloaded for them. Um, you know, Toothbrush, shampoo, things like that, just essentials and like a little bit of money. Like I can't even remember the amount, but a very minuscule amount of money just to kind of, take care of them for a few days. Um, yeah, but that's essentially the work they do. And then uh, on top of that, there is like workshops, job placement, and helping them find sponsors, places to stay. That's been kind of expanding as I think they're adding more volunteers and funding and things like that. But all essential things that they're able to do right now at a small scale and hopefully at a larger scale later
Okay.
as more deportees show up.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I remember I interviewed a guy again back in the first Trump presidency when, yeah, I think he had been born here, but I guess he must have been because he wasn't an American citizen, but like had convicted of a relatively minor crime, I think, and then just got sent back here and didn't know anybody, didn't have any family, didn't really know what the hell to do with himself. So yeah, they definitely need support. I mean, so I mean, are you kind of like keeping in touch with these? I'm assuming it's mostly men because I feel like it usually is. Are you keeping in touch with them as they try to get settled, or?
Absolutely. I would consider some of them my very, very close friends right now. They're some of the most incredible, big hearted people I've ever met because these are people that have made mistakes early in life, right? A lot of them had been get incarcerated when they were really young and back in like the 90s, right? So a lot of them are rehabilitated, right? They had already served their time for whatever they might have done. And I don't care what they've done. This is me personally. Like they could have done something really, really bad, but they served their time. And the people I've met are just amazing, kind-hearted people. And in that time frame, after they got out, um, they were supposed to be deported right away. Like if there was a different country, if they were part of it from a different country, they might have already gotten deported. But Vietnam wasn't taking deportees at that time. So folks got out, and then basically what would happen is a lot of you can't get citizenship after that. So people who are like, once I started to talk about it, who were like, oh, do it the right way. Well, they can't, right? They can't get citizenship anymore. Either lost their green card or like they just can't, they're no longer able to get citizenship because of their record. And Vietnam won't take them. So then they're just checking in with ICE every single year. And we're talking about decades, right? So then they have families, right? They have businesses, right? A lot of them like have stayed out of trouble and like they're just average people, right? Who have already served their time. And then once the policies started changing recently, then they got grabbed by ICE. And then, a lot of them spent like 4 to 6 months in ICE detention and then thrown on a plane that, took like 36 hours to get to Vietnam, not knowing where they're even going. Because right now you have third country deportations where guys are getting dropped off in Africa. And so it's the scariest process for a lot of them. And I've sat down and talked to a lot of these guys who are my friends now. And then they said, I served my time and I accept my fate. I accept the stigma that comes from being incarcerated. People don't want to give me a job, or whatever. That stigma, that I accept that. And they accept being deported. I accept my fate with that, is what they would tell me. Like, I expect to get deported. But it's the process that they went through that is just so unnecessarily brutal for them and their families. That has just been crazy. And then with that, even having had gone through that, they want to help other people who are going through the same thing, and the next wave and the next wave and the next wave of deportees. So they're volunteering. Like the majority of volunteers at Balo Project in Vietnam are deportees, former deportees, who are just showing up to be a brother for the next person that shows up here.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's crazy to think. They're almost the lucky ones, because, as you said, they have these third country deportations, and I know there's been reporting from some U.S. media of like Vietnamese and I think other Southeast Asian deportees ending up in like Eswatini, which
Yeah.
I think is like a landlocked tiny country surrounded by South Africa. Like,
Yep.
I don't.
Yeah.
What do you even do? That's just, it's crazy.
Yeah. South Sudan, Djibouti, like all these other countries. Yeah, I can't speak too much on like why that's happening, what happens to
No,
them
sure.
there, things like that. But it is mind-boggling. Like it's just like, what is happening here and
Yeah.
why?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I'll definitely include that link in the show notes as well. And I guess one final topic shift, something a little lighter. Lighter. I know. So you were back when you lived here, like 10 plus years ago. You taught, and then you were a teacher back in the States as well. So I know education is a big part of um, your personal background, and you launched Survival Vietnamese, like, I think an Instagram page, and it's an actual business, I suppose, but focusing a lot on, or at least from what I've seen. Correct me if I'm wrong, but yeah, obviously teaching Vietnamese to people, which is something I've terribly failed at over all the years here. But how did you decide to do that, and how has that gone?
Um, I think like I'm always gonna be a teacher, no matter what I end up doing. If I actually am able to continue doing social media, uh, that will, be a different layer on top of me being a teacher. I'm always a teacher. So when I was making content, I just saw some comments where people were like, "Oh, I'm actually following you because I'm learning Vietnamese from your content," and I'm like, "Oh." Yeah, let's teach Vietnamese, because anyone who lives in Vietnam knows that if you don't have the language, it's such a big difference to then possess it and then be able to connect to locals. It is a massive tool that really magnifies their experience here, right? And then also, really, really important is I'm from the diaspora community. So then what we're going through is language loss. Vietnamese is fading away in diaspora communities. And I always tell people that the Vietnamese I'm going to say the Vietnamese family, like across the world right now, in Vietnam and in the diaspora community, they're kind of going through very similar things at the same time. Our parents who went through this traumatic war in the 60s, 70s, they're all aging at around the same time. And everyone is like watching that happen and then like going through this very emotional time right now where it's like, oh, my parents are, this might be their last like 10, 15 years or even less. And then for the diaspora who are like, man, I've never really been able to connect with them or like talk to them because I don't have Vietnamese. And how do I pass it on to my kids? And my grandkids can't even talk to their grandparents, or, like all this is happening and it's all having to do with language. So then I really wanted to be a part of like, language preservation and somehow in any way helping Vietnamese folks, even if it's a little bit, even if it's like talking to their parent a little more. And I've had people message me on my social media saying like, I sat with my mom like at the hospital at her bedside, and I said something that I learned from your videos, and she cried and like it's like she's like, oh, I've never heard you say that before. It's just, man, it's just stuff like that, and it's just like you're not just teaching language. is so much more, so it is a very meaningful experience, uh, being able to do this. Yeah. So survival Vietnamese is like, yeah, it's practical language, practical everyday Vietnamese, but it's also language preservation and targeting a lot of overseas Vietnamese that, want the language to reconnect with their family and their roots.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's a really noble goal. I mean, for you personally, did you grow up speaking Vietnamese, like learning from your parents, or?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah,
I'm like this generation of overseas Vietnamese, where I guess we're the older millennials, like, you know,
right.
and I see this pattern where a lot of us who are from my generation, and I think we're the same age as well, right? So our generation, um, where when we grew up there, we didn't have a lot of young people our age to speak English with. So I was in my family the first to be born in the US. All my older siblings, my cousins, my uncles, aunts, they all came from Vietnam. So I was surrounded by Vietnamese. So I had just maximum exposure to Vietnamese. And like not only that, like I was like chasing after my cousins, like, I want to hang out with you guys, and like they don't speak any English. So I had to speak Vietnamese. And then as you get younger with the diaspora, you have like kids who like they're just surrounded by English speaking family members, and so they just don't have the exposure or the need to even speak Vietnamese anymore. So then I had that need and that exposure early on. So then it kind of gave me the Vietnamese machinery like very early, So now
Gotcha.
like obviously like I'm not fluent like a local, but like
Sure.
I can definitely navigate Vietnam pretty easily.
Okay. Yeah, I definitely see. I mean, I've got quite a few VQ friends at this point. It is definitely a mix of people who are near fluent or fluent like yourself, and others who are can get by but much less conversational, which I guess is some of the people you're appealing to, obviously.
Yeah, it's a whole spectrum.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um, awesome. Well, it was again great to have you on. I know that was like three kind of wildly different topics in a way, but obviously you're doing a lot of super interesting work on really important human human issues, trying to help people and connect with people and all that stuff. So yeah, great to talk through this stuff. And again, I'll share the links to some of the storm relief and Malo project, and obviously we'll be keeping in touch.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks for having me on, Mike.
That's it for this episode of the Vietnam Weekly podcast. Thank you so much for listening. And please rate or review the show on your preferred podcast platform. That helps other people find it. See you next time.